Still waiting on my bar stool.
Which flavor is it? Somebody went to school with those.
Looks good.
I remember a flavor. That was, who did he marry? Did he marry the slime? Oh, he married the slime.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Who won?
I know that because they.
I didn't get a chance.
Oh, you'll never see anything like it.
Wow.
I used to run a KFC here all the time.
Okay, let's get started here. As always, talk slow and speak into the microphone. We're gonna start our committee meetings. And first up is City Properties, Parks and Recreation, Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. Call to order City Properties Parks and Recreation. It is October 26th, 2020, 6 p.m. at the Active Adult Center. All members of the committee are present. Everybody noted on my list. Topics of discussion, we have no new requests for legislation. For miscellaneous discussion, I have a letter from Director McLean. The Parks Department is in the midst of field upgrades over at the sports complex. In the near future, there'll be lighting upgrades in many of the parks. That's all she had for us. According to the Facebook page for the Parks Department, it looked like the Dark at the Park was a good success there. Saw a lot of pictures, a lot of happy people, especially during the pandemic. It was nice to see smiles for once. I could tell under the masks. Psychic like that sometimes. With that, is there any discussion from the committee? Any from the membership? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
All right, and we are adjourned at 6:01.
Thank you. Next up is Public Welfare and Safety, Mrs. DeBevitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to bring to order the Public Welfare and Safety Committee meeting. It's Monday, October 26th, 2020, at 6:02 p.m. and here in the Active Adult Center. All members of the committee are present, as well as all other council members and all others noted. We have one piece of legislation that we will be voting on this evening. It's ordinance number 130, 2020, titled Amend Ordinance number 121, 2020. And this is changing the amount of the contract with Vassar Communications, Inc. by a total of $4,314.21. As Chief Persley explained last week, this was an oversight of something that wasn't included in the initial price, which happens to be a battery analyzer, which is necessary for routine maintenance for this new radio system. Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation? Okay. We also have a new request for legislation. It is a letter from Mrs. Miller requesting legislation to approve the completed Code of Ordinances. Mrs. Miller, do you want to weigh in on that? Pretty general, but yeah. Thanks. Does anybody have any questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation?
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Mr. Greer,
Second.
second by Mr. Griffin. All in favor? Aye. And that passes. Does anyone else have any questions or concerns for the safety committee this evening? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin,
And I'll second.
second by Mr. Greer. We are adjourned at 6:06.
Thank you. Next up is Rules, Marketing, and Development, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rules of Market and Development. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Tonight is the 28th. All members present. All guest notice has online. We have no request for legislation tonight. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion in the body or? Yes, right.
Thank you, Chair. Was there any objections to the rules for appointments from anybody in the membership? Mr. Chair, I can ask the clerk to put that on the agenda for the next legislative meeting if there's no objections.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Griffin, for rules, I don't know if this is the right category for it, but I want to do a certificate for Kane's Flowers. It's been in business in January for almost 100 years. Is there some kind of certificate we give to rules or some kind of something to the city? Does anyone know anything about that or how that be through rules? We draw something up for
I
them?
mean, that resolution of accommodation.
We have to go through the mayor's office.
The mayor's office?
If you go through the mayor's office with the proclamation or go through city council, which is probably the more appropriate action, so it's a little more public. That could have a resolution.
We can go to the city council, and in January, it'll be 100 years in the same family, business and barber. That's showing some love and appreciation to that. I mean, they're out long and still going in.
Which, I believe, Mr. Jaffer, it's in your ward, and that you would have
Yes, I'm not
the
worried.
information that you can give to Renee, and she'll type up the resolution.
Okay.
Yeah,
Grant for that.
resolution.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Consider the information, she'll do it.
I appreciate it, thank you.
I'll need a request letter.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more remarks for discussion? Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick.
I'll second that, sir.
We're adjourned at 6:07.
Okay, next up is City Utilities, Mrs. Cope.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's October 26th. City Utilities is meeting in the Active Adult Center. All members are present and others are muted. Our topic of discussion is the current legislation, ordinance number 128, 2020. It's titled the change order for Eclipse Construction. Do we have a discussion on that we'll be voting on tonight? Okay.
Actually, I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Since there was a soil, study done to a pretty great extent in 2000, is there any way that they are responsible if something was found that, because it was already completed, are we protected under that initial environmental study?
Yes. They
I
have-
know it's kind of a,
I don't know
it's
if
kind of
I
a,
fully understand your question, but I haven't seen, I haven't read the legal document in its entirety, but my assumption is, and this is only an assumption, that when that land was transferred over to the city, that PDG probably absolved themselves of any liability in in that property.
I was under the impression that the city of Barberton, before they put that fields there, did that soil, or did the environmental study. I'm not positive, I can find out, I'm pretty sure.
I have the study, I don't remember, I didn't read it, like I said, I didn't read it in its entirety, I looked at the wells that were drilled during that period, that time period for the soil sample. But, and there's nothing in there that, all that matters is it was clear, it passed the environmental.
Right.
Right.
Okay,
And that
I'm
was
just
in
curious if-
2000.
right. I'm just curious if they were, once they maybe cleared, or, cleared it, if it's considered clear. I mean, is this their responsibility that they missed something?
I mean, and also our samples came back clear. It really comes back to the contract, where when you come across differing soil conditions, you're supposed to stop and take the appropriate precautions, because you don't know if something is toxic or harmful to the employees or, residents around. So it's unfortunately part of the construction process.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you.
We have no other requests for legislation. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion for now, Mr. Greer?
Thank you, Chair. Two things actually. One just came to mind. Do we know what the results of that, what it was? Like, I know it was cleared, but do we know what it was?
No, so what they do is they test for volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and they all came back negative.
And the second thing is, and forgive me, I didn't reach out to tell you this before, about the service relief program that we just updated from $27,000 to $30,000. I use that form pretty often, and I worked with Mr. Weaver through email. He updated the forms, and he also made those available online. They used to be only available when you went in. Just wanted to give you an update on that, but those forms are now updated.
Online.
And will be hopefully available online.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else for anybody? Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
And I'll second it.
We are adjourned at 6:14.
Okay, last but not least, this is Friday, finance and personnel.
All right, it is, 6:15, and we are beginning the meeting for finance and personnel. We are at the Active Adult Center. All members of the committee are present, as well as all of council, and guests as noted. We have three pieces of legislation on the agenda tonight. The first is an appropriation for the fire department, number 129-2020. And this is for the added cost for the radio system. And it is for a battery analyzer, which was left off of the first ordinance. The second piece of legislation we have is ordinance number 131-2020. And this is an authorization for payment to Kimball Recycling and Disposal Incorporated. This is for a building clean out, which was ordered by the courts. And it was for a dumpster, and they also had some semis there that took away the pallets and some of the other junk. This particular appropriation, however, is just for the dumpsters. And we will, at some point, be reimbursed by the owner of the building. Any questions about either of those two pieces of legislation? Okay, the third piece of legislation is ordinance number 132/2020, which is an appropriation for CARES Act funding. It's in the amount of $4,500. And this is for sanitizing of different buildings throughout the city, COVID sanitizing. Any questions about that? Okay. Is there any items for miscellaneous discussion tonight for finance and personnel? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion made by Mrs. Devitt and seconded by Mrs. Angela. And we are adjourned at 6:18.
Okay, that concludes our committee reports. Since we've only been here 18 minutes, I don't think we need a break. So I think we're gonna go right into our legislative meeting. 1 minute. Okay, let's get this started here. Okay, this is a regular legislative meeting of the Marvin City Council. Today is Monday, October 26, 2020. The time is 6:20. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by an invocation by Mrs. Brown. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear Lord, thank you for all the blessings we have in our personal lives and as a community. Please continue to guide council and all of our city officials in making wise and fair decisions for our residents. Watch over our military personnel as they put their lives in danger to preserve our freedoms. As we exercise one of our greatest freedoms, the right to vote, please help us to choose a fair and competent leader and pass legislation good for our communities and our nation. We ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Mrs. Angela?
Here.
Mrs. Coburn?
Here.
Mrs. Rebecca?
Here.
Mrs. Frye?
Here.
Mr. Peter?
Present.
Mr. Griffin?
Here.
Mr. Hyder?
Here.
Mr. Taylor?
Here.
Okay, council rules state Council Rule 103 states that regular and committee of the whole meetings shall be at 7:30 PM. Since we are starting earlier than this, we need to invoke Council Rule 702. Mr. Bennett?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103.
Thank you, and Mr. Height?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion to invoke 702 to suspend 103.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick, second by Mr. Height to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, approval of the minutes of the September 28th regular legislative meeting. Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, September 28th, 2020, as presented.
Thank you, and Mr. Height.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to approve the minutes on Monday, September 28th, 2020.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Height to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, September 28th, 2020, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. Okay, approval of the minutes of the October 12th regular legislative meeting. This is the bed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, October 12th, 2020, as presented.
Thank you, and Mr. Height.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to approve the legislative meeting on Monday, October 12th, 2020.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Height to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, October 12th, 2020, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Minutes are adopted. Approval of the minutes of the executive session. Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion for the approval of the executive session held on Monday, October 12th, 2020, as presented.
Thank you, and Mr. Height.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to approve the executive session minutes.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Height to approve the minutes of the executive session held on Monday, October 12th, 2020, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Minutes are adopted. Petitions and claims.
There are none.
Matters requested.
They've been passed out.
Thank you. And citizens addressing council.
I have none.
Thank you. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 126, 2020, presented by Mrs. Angela, titled Amending Marvin Codified Ordinance, Chapter 1462, ICC International Property Maintenance Code. An ordinance amending ordinance number 23, 2008, to amend Marvin Codified Ordinances, Chapter 1462, ICC International Property Maintenance Code, to make it the most current edition adopted.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Coker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angela, second by Mrs. Coker, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Height,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 126-2020 be adopted as presented.
Thank you, and Mrs. Coker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second the motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angela, second by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 126, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Height,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Ordinance number 127, 2020, presented by Mr. Greer, titled 2020-2021 Street Road Salt Program. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into contract with Cargill Incorporated for the 2020-2021 Street Road Salt Program through the Community University Education Purchasing Association, Q, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Griffin.
Is it Griffin?
Griffin.
Oh, sorry. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion to adopt. I'm sorry, to suspend.
Okay. A motion was made by Mr. Greer and seconded by Mrs. Angela to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Heide,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 127, 2020 be adopted.
Thank you, and Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion to adopt.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Greer and seconded by Mrs. Angela to adopt ordinance number 127, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mr. Heide.
Yes.
Ordinance number 128, 2020, presented by Mrs. Coburn, titled Change Order Eclipse Construction. An ordinance authorizing the change order in the amount of $18,089.06 with Eclipse Construction for the Betts Ditch Restoration Project and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and seconded by Mrs. Frye to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Heide,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes,
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 128, 2020 be adopted.
Thank you, and Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn, seconded by Mrs. Frye to adopt ordinance number 128, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes,
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heide,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt.
Yes.
Ordinance number 129, 2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, titled Appropriation Fire Department. An ordinance appropriating $3,921.20 from the unappropriated item of the FEMA fund to the fire department capital budget of the FEMA fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Frye's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, seconded by Mrs. DeVette to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Heide.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 129-2020.
And Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Frye's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 129, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Ray,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert,
yes,
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Ordinance number 130, 2020, presented by Mrs. Devitt, title amend ordinance 121, 2020, Vasu Communications, Inc. An ordinance amending ordinance number 121, 2020, by increasing the amount of the contract with Vasu Communications, Inc. by $4,314.21, which would bring the total amount of the contract to $200,987.17, and declare an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Ray,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert,
yes,
Mrs. Devitt.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 130, 2020.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second the motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to adopt ordinance number 130, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert,
yes,
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Ordinance number 131, 2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, title authorized payment, Campbell Recycling and Disposal, Inc. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Finance to pay invoices in the amount of $3,773.59 to Campbell Recycling and Disposal, Inc. and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye and second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Gilbert,
yes,
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 131-2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance 131, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert.
yes,
Ordinance number 132, 2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, title appropriation, CARES Act funding. An ordinance appropriating $4,500 of CARES Act funding from the unappropriated item of the local coronavirus relief fund to the operation and maintenance budget of the local coronavirus relief fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Coleman?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 132-2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and seconded by Mrs. DeVette to adopt ordinance number 132, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt?
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mr. Hay?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
And the first readings.
Second readings of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Third reading of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Appointments,
I have nothing.
miscellaneous and unfinished business.
I have nothing.
Okay, just a reminder, next week we will not be meeting. Next meeting will be in 2 weeks, because I'll be voting here and Monday night I'll be setting up. Do I have anything from the good of the body? Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to share with council, guests and public that recently I started volunteering time and equipment for the Veterans History Project. That is a project that interviews veterans and archives the interview audio documents with the Library of Congress for eternity. I started pre-interviews last week. I've had a lot of interest in this program, but like a lot of interest, so much so that if anybody has time and wants to sit down and interview a veteran, I'll be glad to walk you through that and donate the equipment for the time of that interview so that it can happen. Like, there's a lot of interest in this. So it doesn't have to be anybody that's able-bodied to be able to interview. It's a volunteer project. And I do plan on making this an ongoing program, so there's no rush, but the sooner we get veterans in, the more likely we're going to get their story heard and archived. So just wanted to share that with everybody. And if you know of a veteran, or you are a veteran that wants to volunteer to be interviewed, you can send an email to my personal email address, which is justin@justin-greer.com. I'm not sure if I can use the city email, but you can share there too as well.
Okay. Anybody else? Communication for the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Everyone should have received an updated newsletter from the Garden Active Adult Center. A lot of great information there. Again, really want to see the praises of the parks department. The hearings, all the mandates, and all the kind of craziness going on today, but really being there for all the active adults. When this first started and everyone was kind of staying at home, they did a great job reaching out to all the seniors, especially those that may be living alone, to just have a conversation with them. And that social interaction, even though it would be a phone, is so important. So a lot of great information on this issue. So, I have a few updates here related to COVID and some new programs from the state or additional programs that are being added to. There's a small business relief grant through the CARES Act through the state of Ohio to assist businesses that have been harmed by the effects of COVID. $125 million grant total will provide the relief to Ohio businesses negatively impacted. So that's on the Ohio Development Services Agency's website, so all the criteria there. There's also a home relief grant. So Ohioans who are behind on rent, mortgage, water and or sewer bills, utility bills, able to receive assistance. You can be applied to outstanding rent, mortgage, utilities, going back to April 1st of this year. So it's just back to here and now. Going back to April 1st, the program will end on December 30th of this year. So that's a $50 million program. And also, all the information here on Ohio Development Services Agency website. That's the home relief grant. The last one is the Bar and Restaurant Assistance Fund. There is $37.5 million in that fund to assist Ohio's on-premises liquor permit holders. So again, on the Ohio Development Services Agency website, all the application process, the criteria for those three programs are on there. I want to thank our Summit County Executive Item Shapiro and County Council. This came out today. That they have agreed to, through COVID-19 CARES Act funding, to provide local government payroll support grant funds. So this will be given to the University of Akron, the City of Akron, and the City of Arbor. So for their police forces for payroll support. So the University of Akron will be granted $2 million for their police force, and the City of Akron, the City of Arbor, total will be $3.5 million. So we're about $500,000 that will be coming for our police force for payroll support. So that just came out today, so I want to thank County Council, and Summit County Executive Ivan Shapiro, and their staff. A quick announcement, the health board meeting for this Wednesday is going to continue. We will hold that here Wednesday at 4:30, so there's a time change. 4:30 here at the Active Adult Center for the Board of Health. Was proud to represent myself and our planning director, Mr. Trevor Hunt, in conjunction with City Architecture and AMATS, to present at the Trails and Greenway Conference last week. This was through, it was done virtually. We did a presentation on the Magic Mile, which included City Architecture and AMATS and others. We're the only one from Summit County that was invited to present. So I was talking about the Magic Mile, what led up to it, the creation of it, and what's happened in that area in downtown since then. And what are the plans moving forward? So all the other projects were in Carter County, bike lanes and trailways and things like that. So very honored to be, that we were invited to present and get our downtown and our Magic Mile and the great things that we're doing out on a more regional perspective than just right here locally. So I thought that was a great show there. Do have a lot of important meetings in the coming weeks on various developments in town, and I'm hoping by the end of the year that we can release some of this publicly. Some pretty exciting developments that we're putting together. So, as mentioned earlier, the Barberton Residential Services Relief Program is help for Barberton residents with utility help. That's form is online. Summit County also has a homestead exemption form that can be filled out, and that's online as well. And if you meet that criteria, it can help with property taxes. So I'm working on a work session or event for Barberton residents to come in and fill out those forms, so we can get those filed with the appropriate agencies to help our residents. So more information on that here very soon. And then lastly, as our president said, next week, council is off, so they can set up for the voting day on Tuesday. Very important that everyone gets out to vote. If everyone's registered, I believe everyone here is registered, but not home. Very important. Not only locally do we have a few amendments on the ballot, we also issued 9, very important to the city of Arlington and in our future. So city services are not in jeopardy. But also countywide, all the way up to the President of the United States. So a lot of important items on the ballot. I know the lines have been very long, but it seems that they're getting the people through very quickly. Get out and vote, and make your voice heard. And then just lastly, open office hours, I'll have that December 5th on Saturday here at the Active Adult Center from 9 to 11 on the 5th.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Mayor, my internet won't connect, so I can't speak on the state grants for rent and mortgage relief. I do know that the small business and the bar and restaurant grants, the application process opens November 1st. But I'm not sure about the vendors one. I can't connect right now.
Starting November 2nd.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, yes, Monday, November 2nd. I apologize.
Mrs. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. President. The library, in conjunction with the downtown merchants, is going to have a scavenger hunt for the whole month of November. They're gonna have book covers in different merchants and a contest to help bring shopping and ideas to the downtown merchants.
Thank you.
The whole month of November.
Anyone else? With nothing else, do I hear a motion to adjourn? Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that we adjourn.
And Mr. Height.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeVette and seconded by Mr. Height that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 6:44. And happy Halloween.
Thank you, sir.